In 1977, a man called Tom Ogle filed a patent for a system to make the internal combustion engine more efficient, which he described as a car that consumed just 4 litres of petrol for 161 kilometres. The patent was finally granted in 1979. Ogle's super-efficient system to achieve the feat operated as follows. Instead of keeping the fuel tank at ambient temperature and pressure, it reduced the pressure but raised the temperature so that the petrol produced vapor. The steam burned off and essentially ran the engine. Naturally, the engine had to be structurally modified to accommodate the changed operating parameters. If the device really worked, it would have used much less petrol to keep a car running than before. No one would have thought that neither Ogle nor his promising invention would have a long career. So the question is, what is true about Tom Ogle and his mysterious engine? Well, I tried to check this story as much as I could. Ogle really invented a 100 miles per gallon engine. Lots of people witnessed the demonstration, and even El Paso's mayor was there. As you can see, the patent was indeed filed by Ogle, and it was accepted, which of course does not mean that the device is actually capable of powering a car for 161 kilometers on 4 liters of fuel. However, it's easy to see how the story can be embedded in a conspiracy theory of a clever little man fighting the oil companies, who eventually kill him while disguising the incident as an overdose. This image of the underdog fighting the giant corporations was established early on, with the New York Times in 1978, for example, going so far as to say that Ogle had become a real hero in El Paso, a David fighting the oil companies. The article also reveals that all was not exactly well around the miraculous invention, then called the Oglemobile. Although many people reported that the old Ford in which Ogle had built the prototype of his invention had indeed travelled tremendous distances using very little fuel, there were plenty of skeptics. Ogle claims that his idea can harness all the energy in petrol, which explains its unimaginable efficiency. In addition, the Oglemobile would have reduced the emissions of a vehicle to essentially zero, while also eliminating the vibration and heating of conventional engines, which would have extended the life of the engine. This is all well and good, but even a physicist, Robert Levy, speaking to The Times, said such a feat was unthinkable given the law of conservation of energy. He argued that there are not enough British thermal units in such a small amount of fuel to propel a car of this weight over such a distance. In other words, even if the invention eliminates the loss completely, or in other words, even if it is perfectly efficient, there is still not enough energy in that amount of fuel to achieve that goal. So, unless the engine is producing energy from nothing, which is impossible because of the above law of physics, it is a scam. Levy told a Times journalist that he suspected the latter and offered Ogle $1,000 if the engine passed a test the physicist had set up. But the inventor did not take up the offer. It was typical of the public mood that Levy was considered by many in El Paso to be downright un-American for his opinion. And even an El Paso Times article of the time was quite hostile to Levy, who was essentially referred to as an unemployed man with a PhD in physics. What is clear from this article, however, is that Ogle did indeed refuse Levy's $1,000 challenge, citing several reasons. Richard W. Hum, an official at the US Department of Energy, agreed with Robert Levy. Hum inspected the engine after Ogle successfully drove it from El Paso to Deming, burning on only 7.5 litres, or 2 gallons of fuel. The official found no obvious signs of cheating in the engine, but he also found that the performance was in contrast to the physical reality, and he left. It should also be mentioned that not all experts were so skeptical. Gary Hawkins, who was an engineering professor at the University of Texas at the time, calculated the physics behind the machine's operation and found it possible that the device could significantly reduce petrol consumption. Hawkins even began working on a commercial design for the engine. At the time, Ogle had big plans. Within a year, in 1979, he would have founded his company, Ogle Fuel Systems, backed by an anonymous investor. Ogle's ideas might seem naive to today's eyes. He thought he would offer the device for $100 each, but his company would still grow to become one of the largest companies in the world. Because, he argued, everyone in the world would buy one. However, there are holes in Ogle's story. He claimed to be in talks with Ford, but the big US car company had never heard of the man. What's more, Ogle also said, further fueling the conspiracy theories of the ages to come, that a representative of a major oil company offered him $25 million for the invention, which he, of course, turned down. The Times then contacted a Houston oil company, where they laughed at the idea that Ogle's invention would shake up the energy giants, arguing that it would only make finite oil supplies last longer. Another question is that the profit margins would obviously not be the same if vehicles needed so much less oil, while it would not have been economically advantageous. For the industrial giants, Ogle's invention was politically and environmentally much more advantageous. It would have significantly reduced oil consumption, further preserving America's domestic oil reserves and reducing dependence on oil imports. Energy-rich dictatorships like Russia, Iran, and Saudi Arabia could have said goodbye to their wealth and power. From an environmental point of view, emissions would have been radically reduced, and the climate crisis would not be so severe today. We can be sure that these were not the dominant considerations in the early 1980s. Ogle's invention could not have had the career it deserved, as it would have reduced the revenues of the big oil companies, and almost certainly undermined the petrodollar, whose value is primarily determined by the prevailing oil price. In 1981, an attempt on his life was made, with an unknown assassin shooting him. Ogle survived, but later in that year, he died in another strange incident. The El Paso Times reported the case. The 26-year-old man appeared frightened and sad when he entered a local pub, where he had a few drinks, then went home to his girlfriend, where he suddenly collapsed. Paramedics attempted to resuscitate him 3 times, but he eventually died while being taken to hospital. The official explanation is that Ogle had taken and drunk a sedative, which may have caused his death. This scenario was confirmed by the deceased's mother, who said that recently, drink and sedation had become Ogle's way of life. The mother also revealed that Ogle was very afraid of a man named Tim Strayer, to whom he owed money. Ogle's lawyer added that he was in the middle of a lawsuit against Strayer for allegedly forcing him to give up 22% of the profits from his invention. The lawyer had last seen Ogle a week before his death, and he appeared to be severely depressed. The lawyer also said that the inventor was essentially bankrupt and was trying to sell everything he owned. There was also speculation that Ogle had been set up. He had been drunk by professional gamblers and then lost heavily to them at pool. It can be that he met with the wrong people at the wrong time, and they did something to him. Ogle's invention was a minor sensation in the late 1970s, but nowadays it is hardly ever heard of, with only the occasional Reddit forum speculating about the amazing engine and the supposedly mysterious circumstances of the inventor's death. Ogle came from a poor background, had big plans, but died prematurely, that's for sure. However, it is highly doubtful that the entire oil industry was behind his death. Rather, his tragedy seems to have been the result of a few unfortunate decisions and a poorly chosen acquaintance. Of course, it is very difficult to say anything from 40 years. Certainly, there are few traces of Ogle on the web, just a few articles from his heyday, and the patent itself. Incidentally, the latter expired in 1997. No one has extended it, and no one has built the super-efficient engine that once helped Tom Ogle get from El Paso to Deming in his old Ford with a few litres of petrol. True, there would be no need for that, since today's engines, the culmination of many decades of engineering, are already very efficient. But they are not capable of the Oglemobile's miracle. If you want to see more content and be a member of a growing community, then push the subscribe button and be in the center point.